Yeah. Hi, good morning. Thank you so much for the helping me with the time change. I thought that New York City's traffic was tough, but actually now I see that London is potentially even worse. So I'm here super excited to talk about how to use your product skills in your careers. And I really love talking with product people because all of you have so many superpowers. Whenever you think about, how do people describe what are the skills and competencies that product managers or product marketeers have, they usually revolve around analytics, strategy, being really creative, understanding the customer. But most importantly, it is that you guys can plan things, right? We can think about where are we heading and how to get things done. So one of the things, though, that as I've been, evolving in my career and teaching different product people, is that I see that whilst product managers often execute flawlessly those skills for their products or their features, sometimes they actually forget that you can use those skills for your own lives. So that's what we're going to talk about today. I'm going to give you a couple of business examples and even some of the techniques that I use with people in my teams or people that I coach as we think about how are they growing their careers. So this is the sum of all of the different skills, and we're going to separate the talk in two parts. One of them an example, and actually thinking about how do you set up a North Star vision for your life. And the second one is how do you actually think about the product roadmap and how do you actually get through all of the things that you want to accomplish. So I now work at Intuit. Intuit is the maker of QuickBooks that I know it's fairly popular here in the UK. Intuit is a Fortune 500 company, almost 70 billion market cap. And we have been growing a lot, mostly in Commonwealth, English-speaking countries. And the reason is because we're the leaders in financial management software, which means that we need to be super on top of everything that is fiscal and compliance laws, which means that at the same time, when we're thinking about growing to a new country, it can get very tricky, right? Because you need to adapt to how are people doing their taxes, basically be compatible with whatever is the equivalent of the US IRS system. So I was tasked to think about global expansion. I'm the VP of global expansion. And my manager said, Jimena, think about what is going to be the next country where we're going to launch. And then knowing that it's fairly problematic. In fact, the last time that we launched a product was 6 years ago. That's the last time that we had launched. I think it was in France. So thinking about all of the risks that entails in terms of you have a public company, we need to think about going to a new place and how do you think about the rules and what are going to be the new partners that we need to integrate with? What about the offices and all of the part about setting up a legal entity? So I started basically from scratch thinking about what would be the best place to launch. And imagine if you think about going from an idea to actually having a fully compliant launch product, how long do you think it took us? Let's raise your hands. We know that the last time we had launched a country was 6 years ago. So let's say between 2 and 4 years. How many of you think that it took us that long? A couple of people only. So now let's do between 1 year and 2 years. That's the majority, about 85%, and less than a year. 2 believers. It actually took us 3 months. And the reason it took us 3 months is because we did a lot of stuff related to how would we set up a vision, think about intermediary milestones that would allow us to advance very quickly. And just as we did that for business, that's how I'm going to show you how to do that potentially for your life. So one of the things about how we built QuickBooks, it was actually in Mexico, which is really funny because I grew up in Mexico and I hadn't worked in Mexico for about 20 years. So when I decided that Mexico was the next country, I was really thrilled that I needed to learn about all of the fiscal laws that I had been able to not think about when I was growing up and living then in different places. And I was surprised to see that Mexico is the country in the world that has the most complex fiscal system. So it was interesting, both in that I needed to go through the most complex country, but also that I had to now learn, again, what I probably should have had to be an expert of had I lived in Mexico. And how we started here is that at Intuit, we do a lot of customer empathy. When we thought we would need to go to Mexico. We needed to understand what were going to be the unique problems that the country had. So we did more than 100 interviews before we even thought about really nailing down the strategy and what was going to be the roadmap. So here we have different tools that we use at Intuit. Some of those things that you see on the background is, for instance, how do you think about a whole work process of people that run their businesses? Where are the major customer points and customer problems, so that we could actually say, this is the area where we really believe that there's a huge problem and how we can solve it. But here, the main point that you need to take away is that when you're thinking about a problem, just starting with a very big brainstorming and just later on the narrowing of the ideas is really important. So then what we did was to set a clear vision and a roadmap. And here you see on the left-hand side, actually my right-hand side, it's a 6-pager. That's something that companies like Amazon and Intuit use, where we basically say in a very succinct document, 6 pages, that's how it's called that way, what is going to be the strategy? How do we think about what are going to be the different milestones that we want to see? What are our leap of faith assumptions, which means what are things that we need to believe so that something happens? And how will we actually think about putting together all of the different teams that are working on something so that we can execute? And then what you see on the other side is basically a timeline and the milestones. So we did not, the reason why we could advance so quickly was that we said, okay, before we launch a product, if we were to wait, so the product is really complete and basically has all of the tools that people would be searching for, we would actually need to wait more than 4 years. But what is the most narrow number of features that we can launch so that people can be happy and we can start better understanding what is going to be the customer reaction to our problem, how do we think about marketing, and so on. So we basically set a bunch of milestones that we would say, if this is true, then we can invest further, which allowed a lot of faster decision making because we could start with something very simple and small and later on start growing that. So then the next thing was about launching, iterating, and learning. I really believe that it's important to think about launch something, then you understand where you see it at versus, again, waiting a long time until you have a final product that perhaps once you launch, you realize that you were solving the wrong problem. So nowadays we have an office for more than 40 people. It's really funny because in Mexico now we have this whole team. We have piñatas at the office. So it's really a blend of cultures from being a very US-centric company that is now fully compliant in a country that speaks a different language, where we needed to launch a number of different things. Imagine, for instance, just customer support. We needed to teach people the local rules of Mexico and have them answer all of those emails in Spanish. So there was a lot of infrastructure that needed to go into us being able to launch this product. But fortunately, things are going really well. We just finished our first quarter, and we're actually the country that is doing the best in terms of forecast versus other countries. And we're also hiring a country manager. So if you have, someone that is a good product leader that wants to move to Mexico, that might be the role. But let me actually, as I step back, and again, there was a business example of how to think about something really large, right? Like, how do you think about, from a public company perspective, what is going to be the next country where you launch? What about the product? What about sales and marketing, and then launching a team? But at the same time as I was launching Mexico, a lot of people would come to my office and they would say, like, Jimena, I'm thinking about my next role, but at the same time, I'm also thinking about, say, how to take care of my aging parents, or I'm thinking about when is the best time to have children. I'm thinking about just like all of these different things, like even in which country should I live? How do I think about life? And it almost seemed that all of these questions were so big and so complex because they had many different variables, right? They had all the part about being happy at work, but also thinking about a happy life and having a happy family and all those things that almost made a lot of the people coming to my office being not having the ability to think about how to even tackle the problem or decipher what would be the different variables that they cared about for their next role. And the interesting thing is that we never stop growing up. But it almost seems like we stop asking ourselves that question of what do I want to be when I grow up? And that is a photo of me when I was 5 years old. It was my first day going to school. And back in the day, I thought that I wanted to be working at a cash register or an elevator operator because I really like buttons and I like machines. So that's what I thought that, at the time looked like a good idea. Then as you heard, I thought that I was going to be an ice skater. I did become one. But then I had one of my major decision points. Was I going to quit high school so that I could continue skating and competing internationally? Or was I going to quit skating? And I chose the latter, which led to me learning different languages. And that's how I came to study in France and lived the first 10 years of my career in Europe. But the point is that idea of us thinking about what is it that we want to be should never stop. And in fact, we never stop growing up, right? You at some point thought, I want to work in product. I either want to be a product manager, work in product marketing, or something in between. And that's what you're doing right now, right? But also the reason why you're here in this room is because you're also investing in your own career. So it means that this is one step that is going to lead you to all of the things that you want to do in the future. And my point is that we're always reframing how do we think about our jobs, how do we think about our life and the next things that we want to do. So that leads me to really the meat of the talk, which is you can run your life like a product roadmap. So in the first phase, let's actually think about some ideas that you can take in terms of how do you think about your goals so that you can think about a true north vision for your life. And again, the point here is not that your guys are going to go and exactly use all of the tools that I mentioned. It's just that in my experience, having worked with so many different teams, is that I sometimes see that people sometimes are not thinking about the bigger questions, or again, they seem so complex. So that sometimes when we start with a format or a template or a tool that I can give them, it allows them to start brainstorming and start narrowing down to those things that sometimes feel like they're problems, right? That when it's the weekend, the weekend comes and we're thinking, oh man, I just don't know what to do 5 years from now. But in that case, you could actually use some of those tools and start brainstorming so that you can actually have some answers. So what I do with people in my teams is that we start by writing goals. As you guys probably work with designers. We all do a lot of post-its. So you can either do it in post-its where you basically start doing a quick brainstorming on what do I think that I care about in life and what would it look like? And you don't need to necessarily have the right words, right? In my case, some of those where I want to visit 50 countries by next year. And actually in the intro, it said that that I had 44 countries. Just yesterday I was in Poland. So now I'm at country 48, 49. So I'm hopefully going to get to that goal of 50 countries. But, others would be more about professional goals, like sitting on a board of a public company and so on. So my point is with people that I have done this exercise with, they all write many different things from learning languages to say helping their parents with financial support so that they can actually have a good healthcare and so on. It doesn't really matter what it is. You just basically start brainstorming a lot of things very quickly. The second part, just like in product, it's about creating segmentation and doing a little bit of categorization. That's a part that I really like because then you can see insights that you didn't even think that existed. An example is that first you start with categories. So some of your goals might be related to career. Some of them could be about learning. Some of them could be about your impact in the world, family, love, whatever it is. Then some things that people do is that we actually organize them by when in your life do you think that that goal needs to be achieved. Some of them could be, well, in the next year, like my example with the countries, I want to visit X number of countries. But there were others related to, say, helping with my parents as they are aging in Mexico. That's probably something that I need to think about a decade from now. So there's things for different times in your life, and you start thinking about by when do you need to think about that goal. The second part, like in product, is thinking about how hard a goal will be, and also how impactful it is. There will be things like, again, the example of the countries that I visited, that it's not really very impactful. I mean, it's something that it's fun, but it's not like I'm going to die if by next year I didn't visit 50 countries. But there's going to be other goals in life, as an example, the relationship with families or so on, that definitely you say, this is something that I really, really care about in life, and hence it is going to have a high impact. So once you actually have created a lot of those relationships, you can see by decade what are the most important milestones that you have and what are the ones that are the most complex to achieve. And in that sense, then you can actually start separating your life into phases in terms of, like, for instance, in my 40s. I see my 40s as doing A, B, and C, and hence some of the things that I need to plan, going back again to the example of, say, aging parents, how do I think about travel or a job that allows me to be able to visit them when they are sick? That's actually a lot of the questions that people that I have coached are thinking of. An example, if in the 30s is the time when to think about families, then perhaps you need a job that allows you obviously flexibility so that you can have nice working hours versus, say, a time in the 20s when you're actually, are able to invest more time in your career. So here is an example of a summary of thinking. 20s, at least for me, it was about building the right business skills. I worked in strategy consulting in Europe and others that were basically the building blocks for a really good career. 30s, it has been a lot about tech. 40s is going to be about impact in boards and others. But that just like gives you a rough idea of how to think about timelines. And therefore, you can actually have a vision of how do you think about the different decades. This might be a little bit more American, but this was an example of The Intern, where it's a movie where the person is actually investing a lot in her career. That's Anne Hathaway. And then as I would see my 70s or 80s, I would actually be Robert De Niro, who's the person that is actually changing careers and helping other younger entrepreneurs succeed. And Iris Apfel, she's a total icon in terms of fashion. I love fashion and jewelry and things like that. So I can totally see how, 20 years from now or so, I'm definitely perhaps not going to be just a business person. I'm going to be somehow involved in fashion or something just like her. So this is just a funny way to actually think about, again, what is each part of your life could be, and the fact that you can actually be someone very different in different stages in your life. So now if we think about how do you instrument this all and think about a product roadmap, an example could be, in my case, I was a consultant in Paris and I already had a pretty good career, but I thought I really want to be in Silicon Valley because a lot of the companies that I was working with were in technology at the time. So say Nokia, I was working in electronics, semiconductors, and I thought, innovation is really happening on the other side of the world, and how am I going to get there? Because that's really where I want my career to go. And in that sense, there were a couple of important milestones that without them, it was going to be impossible for me to actually accomplish that goal. An example was that I needed a visa so that I could work in the US. I needed, obviously, to think about getting a product manager role and then hopefully growing my career again. So once I knew what were some of those milestones, I thought, okay, what is the way in which I'm going to achieve them? And two tools that we use either for business or for this type of roadmaps are leaps of faith assumptions, which means what are the things that you believe need to happen so that something becomes true. In my case is that companies would hire a PM even though I didn't have a CS degree. Another example would be that a company would be able to sponsor my visa and others. And then you actually have other elements that you also need to brainstorm, which are reasons to believe. In businesses, could be, for instance, going into Mexico, a reason to believe that we would be successful is that we knew that we could shorten a lot of the workload from businesses in Mexico from 20 hours to 2. In my case, it was that a lot of the tools that I had learned in my 10 years of career experience before, I knew were going to be be helpful in terms of strategy, analytics, and others. And I also knew that there were other foreigners that had been able to get jobs in Silicon Valley. So that's pretty much where it starts in terms of thinking about the framework, about why do you think that something is going to be possible, but also things that need to happen so that it actually becomes true. And this is just, I'll be very synthetic in terms of kind of how did my roadmap pan out. As I mentioned, I was a strategy consultant in France, went to MIT for business school. That's what allowed me to have a student visa. And then I started actually from scratch doing internships for free because I really needed the experience. And I think that's something that sometimes we don't talk about in careers. And that is that we think about careers as linears and always going up. In my case, I had to actually trade even how much I was getting paid and the level at which I started because I needed the experience. So when I was a student, again, I took free internships. At that point, it was at Facebook, which was, no one even knew what it was about, and it was a startup. It's funny to think about it like 10 years ago, what it was. But then that allowed me to have that Silicon Valley tech experience that then Zynga, do you remember that there was Castlebere and Farmville when you would have in your feed people trading hammers and things like that? You guys might be a bit too young to remember that. But anyway, back in the day, there was like a feed on Facebook where people would used to trade things. And I was one of the first product managers that was in that company. And what was really interesting is that it was one of the companies that had the most product user data so that we could actually think about how to change product so that you could basically create a new business and think about growth and monetization. That experience led me to then joining Meetup. You know, meetups when you have an interest or a hobby that you can go and meet other people with a similar interest. I became director of product there, which then led me to becoming the chief product officer of OkCupid, the dating app. And we actually was able to take the company public together with Meetup and Tinder as we actually had a spin-off for all of the dating apps under the Match umbrella. So all of those experiences don't have anything to do with financial management software or accounting, but a lot of the things that actually threads all of this was the sum of experiences that I was accumulating from strategy, analytics, building products, building teams that actually enabled me to get to the place where I am now. And this is actually an example of another person that I coach, where she's a product manager at a large public company, and she wants to be a chief marketing officer. So this is just an example of how we planned her career. One important thing is that when you're thinking about changing jobs, I really think that diagonal moves are very difficult. And this is what I mean. Usually you can move up within the same company. That means that you're having a promotion, or you can move laterally. That means that you're in the same company, but perhaps are doing something different. An example here is that she's a PM, and she could actually move within the same company to be a product marketing manager. And that is basically that idea that you can move laterally so you can explore something new. And then if you're good at it, she could become then a senior product marketing manager within that company. At that point, she could actually change to a startup where people usually really like that combination of analytics, product management, product marketing, and think about her role as an example as head of growth. She could grow in that sense, but later on might need to take a career or a title cut so that she can actually have an even bigger role. As an example, if we're talking about growth, that's just one aspect of marketing. But if, say, she wanted to become a head of marketing as a whole, then she might not be able to be director, but she could be the head of at some startup, which might lead to then her becoming a VP of marketing and then a chief marketing officer. And the only reason why I'm showing you this is, again, because there's this notion that careers are linear, but it's never the case. And many times you need to think about trade-offs in terms of what are you learning and how are you thinking about your career. Because whenever now I go to a lot of board meetings or with people that are very experienced and, pretty much at the end of their careers, I see that the one thing that they all talk about is that they see their career as a journey. And it was an accumulation of many different steps and many different learning points that allow them to build a career. But it was, again, not that straight line that we sometimes think about when we're coming out of college and we think that everything is going to be perfect and just like that we have a very clear idea of who we want to be. So the idea is that if it works for products that you launch, why wouldn't it work for you? It definitely can. By the way, before this, I actually wrote an article if you want to use some of the tools. I love Excel, so a lot of those things are on Excel, and you don't need to do those things from scratch. Basically, there's a template, and you can start working on your goals. Even the pivot tables so that you can categorize things are already done. So this is the link to that article that has the resources, and then you can basically just make a copy and start working on this on your own if you want. So to finalize, 3 takeaways. One of them is that life roadmaps don't follow linear development. That's something that we have covered. Again, how there's trade-offs, there's many different iterations of who we can be. The second one is that just like in business, it's your true north that matters. It's really about what is that direction, what is that idea for a decade that you want. The final one is that it's okay to launch. And you might fail, you might learn, and you might pivot. The point is that, sometimes we're scared about what is going to be the next job, but it doesn't need to be scary because the worst thing that can happen is that you take that job, it didn't work out, you quit that job, and you take the next one. But at least you actually have some learning, so there doesn't need to be a paralysis. We know that in product, it would be impossible to launch something without testing. It's the same thing with life. So I'm going to leave you with one of my favorite poems. And it's by Mark Twain. And it is that 20 years from now, you will be more disappointed by the things that you did not do than the ones that you did do. So throw off the bowlines, sail away from the safe harbor, catch the trade winds in your sails, explore, dream, and discover. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I have one question for you.
Yes.
I don't even know if it has an answer. How would you deal with a bug fix in a roadmap like this?
How would you read with what?
If your life has a bug, how would you fix it?
A bug in your life?
Yeah.
Well, I actually think that's a really good question that life is so complex, right? There's always setbacks. There's things that you didn't expect. There's going to be, in my teams, there's people that have parents or families that are sick. There's going to be some financial situations. So there's always that ups and downs. And I think that's something that if you think about where are you heading, a bug is usually a problem that you need to think about how do you fix it. If you can expect that in product, it's the same way that you can expect that in life. So I almost, when in my teams, we create that space so that we all can share because we don't expect that life is perfect. We expect that when we go to the office, there's going to be some troubles, there's going to be happiness, and all of that is like just basically coming to the office, being our best selves. But that part about what is a bug, we just take it as this is what is happening, and perhaps if there's someone that is having a little bit more issues at home, that means that they need more flexibility, but it's just actually being able to react and being flexible about it.
Very nice. That wasn't even on the board, ladies and gentlemen. How do you ensure we stick to the goals we set in life?
I think it's good to think about what is your vision of things, but you don't need to be, thinking this is the one thing that I must do, and if I don't do it, my life will be terrible. I think what it's important about this is that it's about a direction, but also knowing that there's flexibility, and that sometimes you might decide, hey, this is the next thing that I want to do. Like I thought I really wanted to be in consulting and strategy, but then I realized that I really like tech, and then I found a way so that I could combine both. How do I think about strategy, analytics, and technology? So my point is that it's good to have a direction because then you're not misguided. But I think it's very important in that direction to understand that there's a range, right? And you can oscillate, but you can also continue learning. And therefore, it's a process.
Cool. Just a quick question to the audience. How many folks in here would say they're fairly new to product management? So what advice can you offer these new folks?
I think that at the beginning, it's all about your learning skills that are basic building blocks. So for instance, analytics, doing a lot of customer empathy, doing a lot of just understanding how to work with engineers and designers. Those are going to be key attributes. I usually, when I develop people, I think about two things. How are you going to be known for things that are your superpowers, things that you're unique at? Like a product manager might be really good about analytics, and people will know that this person will be able to crunch data in a very fast way. But then there's also going to be weaknesses that if you don't solve them, they're always going to hold you back. So yes, as an important step is think about skills. How can you become really good at most of them and then be known for something in particular, because that's what's going to be what people are going to hire you for. And later on, you can think about specializing or not. In my career, I haven't really specialized around an industry, but I really specialize much more about key assets, again, such as strategy, analytics, building teams, and so on. And that was the common denominator of my career. In your path, it could be that you're really good at fintech, or there's something specific about an industry in tech that you like. I think that those are decisions that you can take later on, depending on what are the different opportunities that you have. And it's always, at least for me, it has worked to do a blend between big companies and startups, so that you can, from the big companies, you can understand about rigor and how to work with very big teams. But with startups, you can get the nimbleness and also more of that aspect of driving your product in a way that is more difficult when it's in a big company.
Cool. And this is probably, I'm not going to say it's a QBR, but how often should you review your personal roadmap?
I review it almost yearly. I have used these different types. There's one that I didn't show that I use as a way to think about my career and whether I'm adding things to my life journey. So I review it more or less yearly, sometimes more when I have to think about more bigger career decisions. As an example, now would it be, now that I've been in the US for almost 10 years, do I think about staying in the US or going somewhere else? So it's almost like understanding where are you in life and what do you want? So some of the times when I'm at home and I'm thinking that there's very complex problems that I haven't quite solved, that's when I actually start writing things down. I find it a way to basically realign where am I heading, and a lot of those problems, just basically write them down so that I can start thinking about what is going to be a solution or a path forward. So it really depends on you. There have been years where things are pretty straightforward with work, or I'm super heads down, where I haven't done it. But I would say like every year, a couple of years, it's a good way. And what it's interesting is that over time, you'll see how much some of your goals will have changed and some of them have stayed true. I think it's really interesting to see ourselves as an evolving journey versus, again, one set of very specific goals that we had, 10 years before.
That's great. Thank you, Vero, so much.
Thank you.